Even the biggest horror enthusiasts can grow weary of the same old, same old. To keep the masses entertained, it's imperative the genre throws out as many unique and absolutely bonkers ideas as possible. And as a result, it's no surprise that horror has birthed some of the strangest features ever made. However, there are certain horror features that find themselves in their own category of weirdness. Just by hearing the premise, the first thought most people have may just be, wait, that's a real movie? Even though the elevator pitch must have baffled studio execs beyond measure, they signed off on these projects, allowing the oddest films imaginable to see the light of day. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 WTF ideas turned into horror movies. Number 10, In Fabric. While looking at WTF horror ideas, there's bound to be a couple killer insert object here movies. So let's kick the list off with In Fabric, which revolves around a killer dress. In Peter Strickland's fantasy thriller, several people come into contact with a beautiful red dress, causing each of them to be cursed. After purchasing the haunted garment, a bank teller develops a nasty rash and is attacked by dogs. When a repairman comes into possession of the dress, he's poisoned by carbon monoxide soon after. And when the frightful frock gets bored, it just floats around and strangles its victims. Even though it sounds like a Goosebumps story, In Fabric plays out more like a giallo-inspired melodrama. It's a cautionary tale told in 3 parts, emphasizing the dangers of salesmanship, consumerism, and capitalism. But In Fabric also knows when to go balls to the wall crazy. One moment, 2 characters are having an ordinary conversation, the next there's a man hypnotizing people with washing machine trivia, or an elderly proprietor masturbating to a menstruating mannequin. Even though In Fabric's plot is bizarre, the film itself is more outlandish than anyone could imagine. Number 9, the Banana Splits movie. In 1968, Hanna-Barbera released a variety show involving a whimsical rock band called the Banana Splits. Though the program didn't last long, it went into syndication for over a decade, allowing its fan base to grow. Due to its consistent popularity, it was no surprise when the Banana Splits spawned a movie. However, it was a surprise how the first fully live-action film adaptation based on the lovable musicians was released half a century after the show ended. Stranger still, the film in question, simply called the Banana Splits movie, was a slasher. The story centers around a modern Banana Splits TV show where the titular characters are portrayed by advanced animatronics. When the robots discover their series is being terminated, they kidnap guests and make them perform in horrifying skits, hoping to stay on the air indefinitely. The Banana Splits movie is so delightfully eerie, it is worth a look, even for people unfamiliar with the property. Number 8, Clown. It's hard to tell what's more surreal, the plot of Clown or the fact it was directed by the same guy behind the MCU's Spider-Man trilogy. John Watts' body horror slasher opens with a loving father called Kent hiring a clown for his son's birthday party. When the entertainment doesn't show up, Kent puts on an old clown suit hoping to give his son the best birthday possible. But after the party is over, Kent realizes he can't take his costume off. Worse still, the outfit is possessed by a demon called Cloyne, who slowly turns Kent into a force of evil. With a story like that, Clown sounds like a tongue-in-cheek horror comedy, in the same vein as Killer Clowns from Outer Space. But nothing could be further from the truth. Rather than whipping out cream pies or attacking victims with balloon animals, this insidious jester is biting off fingers and gorging on children. It may sound goofy at first, but it soon becomes clear that there's nothing particularly funny about this clown. Number 7, Love Me Deadly. Love Me Deadly follows a beautiful heiress called Lindsay Finch, who has a taste for the macabre. Though she has the affection of many suitors, there's only one type of man Lindsay is interested in: the dead kind. For as long as she could remember, Lindsay felt at peace at funerals or mortuaries, which led to her developing a sexual attraction to corpses. It obviously goes without saying that Love Me Deadly would be highly controversial if it released today due to the controversial subject matter. With that in mind, it's hard to imagine the commotion the necrophilic horror received when it was released in 1972. That was a year before The Exorcist premiered, and we all know how the world reacted to that. And yet the controversy doesn't stop there. Lindsay eventually develops an attraction to a living person, but only because he reminds her of her dead father. Ugh. There's also a horrifying sequence of a man being embalmed while he's very much alive, and to top it all off, there's a scene where a group of Satan worshippers take part in what can only be described as a cadaver orgy. Looking back, it's a mystery how Love Me Deadly didn't cause a bigger stir. Number 6, It's Alive. Over the years, the horror genre has churned out movies about killer worms, slugs, gingerbread men, cars, snowmen, beds, and even a sauna. As such, it was only a matter of time before somebody concocted a horror flick involving a killer baby. It's Alive begins with Frank and Lenore Davis in the hospital eagerly awaiting the birth of their child. Little do they know that Lenore is about to give birth to a deformed mutant with a thirst for blood. Before the doctors have a chance to cut the umbilical cord, the mini abomination slaughters everyone in sight before making a run for it. Or a crawl for it, to be more accurate. Like Clown, the oddest thing about It's Alive is how serious it takes the absurd premise. Some dramatic moments work, especially when Frank confronts his offspring after it's badly wounded. But more often than not, the sci-fi slasher is unintentionally hilarious. Even though it's supposed to be chilling, watching a teeny-weeny human easily overpowering nurses, cops, and a milkman is sure to tickle the funny bone. After hearing a police officer uttering the words, "Hunting and killing babies doesn't seem to be my speciality," with a straight face, it's hard not to laugh. Number 5. Bad Milo. Although there are plenty of stories involving a demon from the bowels of hell, Bad Milo takes a more literal approach. This potty-humoured comedy revolves around an overly stressed office worker called Duncan who's struggling with severe gastrointestinal problems. Just when he believed things couldn't get worse, a polyp in Duncan's bowels gains sentience, turning into a demon called Milo. Anytime Duncan gets worked up, Milo slips out of his colon to destroy the source of his host's anxiety. To the surprise of nobody, the tyrannical critter increases Duncan's stress levels exponentially, exasperating the very problem he's trying to fix. The already hilarious idea is elevated further by the comedically experienced ensemble, which includes Ken Marino in the lead, Patrick Warburton, Gillian Jacobs, and Stephen Root. Although Bad Milo is hysterically gross, it's also surprisingly touching. Recognizing the beastie from Down Under is drawn to stress, Duncan tries to have an emotional connection with Milo, hoping to curb its malicious nature. All in all, Bad Milo is a must-see, since it has a perfect balance of comedy, drama, and butt demons tearing off people's genitals. And who doesn't want to see that? Number 4. Night of the Lepus. Nobody had a clue what Night of the Lepus was about when it hit theaters back in 1972. Even though the creature feature centered around a town being terrorized by mutant monsters, the trailers and posters never revealed what the Lepus looked like. If horror veterans wanted to learn the truth back in the day, they had to go see the movie on the big screen, or ask somebody who had the misfortune of watching it already. It turns out the Lepus are, now get ready for this, giant bunnies. To the shock of nobody, Night of the Lepus was torn apart by critics due to how hilariously unintimidating the monsters were, and smearing ketchup on them to simulate blood didn't help either. Being the devil's advocate, this premise could work if prosthetics or animatronics were used to make the carnivorous cottontails look unnerving. Instead, the filmmakers just used ordinary rabbits, except in certain shots where the creature is clearly a man in a furry costume. And since rabbits look frickin' adorable, viewers will be gushing over the cuddly critters when they're supposed to be scared out of their minds. Number 3, The Mangler. The Mangler sounded like it could have been something special. It was adapted from a Stephen King short story, helmed by horror auteur Tobe Hooper, and stars Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund. However, it's hard to get on board with the plot thanks to the laughable story. Rather than fighting a towering serial killer or a nightmarish beast, the ensemble squares off against a haunted laundry press. Somehow that's not the dumbest part. It turns out the town elders have been sacrificing their virgin daughters to the infernal machine for centuries in exchange for power, and probably some neatly folded clothes. Despite being arguably Hooper's worst film, The Mangler spawned not one, but 2 sequels. Surprise, surprise, they're both terrible. Number 2, Frankenhooker. Being the granddaddy of sci-fi horror, it's easy to understand why Mary Shelley's Frankenstein has been told and retold countless times. However, the most peculiar retelling has to be Frankenhooker. In Frank Henenlotter's very loose adaptation, a scientist called Jeffrey Franken prepares to resurrect his dead girlfriend using the body parts of prostitutes. As hard as it is to believe, the premise is the most normal part of the movie. Of course, Perhaps the most bewildering moment is when the hookers get their hands on Jeffrey's super drugs, causing all of them to implode, showering the crazed scientist in charred limbs. Scenes like this are so surreal, it's easy to forget this is a Frankenstein adaptation. Speaking of which, Patty Mullen kills it as the Frankenhooker. The titular creature doesn't appear for an hour, but Mullen makes every second on screen count, perfectly emulating Boris Karloff's iconic shuffle and grunts. Number 1. Dead Sushi. Noboru Iguchi has made a name for himself by creating some of the wackiest films ever, including Robo-Geisha, Mutant Girls Squad, and Zombie-Ass Toilet of the Dead. That is the actual title, yes. However, Dead Sushi may be the Japanese filmmaker's nuttiest work. In this trauma-like feature, a young woman called Keiko allies with a janitor to protect her father's diner after the establishment is invaded by flying, man-eating sushi. Somehow, Dead Sushi is more outrageous than it sounds. The slapstick parody includes scenes of sushi breathing fire, a tuna-headed maniac, sushi being turned into nunchucks, and sushi making a girl's eyes explode. Just when it looks like the zaniness has reached its peak, the film throws in a sequence of sushi bumping uglies. The special effects are terrible, but that just adds to Dead Sushi's charm. Anyone who fancies a movie that makes viewers cry out, "What the hell am I watching?" should definitely give Dead Sushi a go.